I hope everyone is doing well, and if everyone can just grab their seats for our final closing session. So I want to, of course, thank you all, not only for mourning on Sunday, but with the snow and everything. Thank all of you for being here for the final day of SphinxCon. I also want to take this opportunity to thank our incredible facilitator, Eric Booth, for his exemplary leadership throughout the convening. You know, when tackling many of these issues surrounding diversity and inclusion in the performing arts, the nature, the architecture of the conversation itself can often be as important as the content. And Eric has really woven a dialogue over the past few days that has empowered the ideas, the incredible ideas being presented, and enriched the discourse that we've all been able to benefit from. So thank you for your talent, your expertise in shaping this time that we've been able to have. Thank you so much. I had the wonderful opportunity to meet our esteemed closing speaker almost a year ago, last April, when I visited Kansas City for some residency work. I found her driven, sincere, engaging, and possessing a unique set of talents that combine a fiery passion and zeal for the arts with an intellect that commands the organizational skill sets necessary to impact the role that the arts form in our society. All the ideal of what we would envision in the leader of the arts for our nation. Jane Chu was nominated by President Obama and then confirmed by the U.S. Senate this past June to serve as the 11th chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts. Since 2006, Chairman Chu served as the president and CEO of the Kaufman Center for the Performing Arts in Kansas City, Missouri, overseeing an over $400 million campaign to build the center. As the performance home of the Kansas City Ballet, Kansas City Symphony, and Lyric Opera of Kansas City, the Kaufman Center has hosted more than 1 million people from all 50 states and countries throughout the world since its grand opening in September 2011. Chairman Chu was a fund executive at the Kaufman Fund for Kansas City from 2004 to 2006, Vice President of External Relations for Union Station, Kansas City from 2002 to 2004. Previously, she was Vice President of Community Investment for the Greater Kansas City Community Foundation. She also served as a trustee at the William Jewell College and on the board of directors of the Ewing Marion Kaufman School and the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce. Chairman Chu was born in Shawnee, Oklahoma, but was raised in Arkadelphia, Arkansas, the daughter of Chinese immigrants. She studied music growing up, eventually receiving bachelor's degrees in piano performance and music education from Ouachita Baptist University and master's degrees in music and piano pedagogy from Southern Methodist University. Additionally, our chairman holds a master's degree in business administration from Rockhurst University and a PhD in philanthropic studies from Indiana University, as well as an honorary doctorate in music from the University of Missouri, Kansas City Conservatory of Music and Dance. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a Detroit welcome to Chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts, Jane Chu.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Aaron, and thank you so much for serving as a presidentially appointed member of our National Council on the Arts. It's been such a pleasure to work with Aaron at the National Endowment for the Arts. It's a benefit to this country to have Aaron Dworkin's passion and intelligence on our team, and it's such a privilege to come to Detroit and see all that you've created with Sphinx. We are here at SphinxCon to share ideas and discuss how we can make the arts more inclusive. And we know that the arts have a powerful ability to bring meaning to our lives. And as leaders in the field, this is something that we want people, as many people, to experience as possible in terms of being in the arts. Because everybody has the ability, as we know, to be touched by a piece of music or a film or a book that they remember being read as a child. Every one of us has an aha moment when we've been struck by the power of the arts, and the artist is awakened in our own ways, and each of us has a different story to tell. So my own story begins with being born into multiple cultures, often with seemingly opposing perspectives. And had I not been engaged in the arts, I'm not sure I would have been able to make as much sense of my own life. Because my parents were from China, my dad came to America in 1948 to get his PhD, and when the communists entered China in 1949, there was a lot of unrest and violence during that initial change of government. And so he knew that he would not be able to return to his home country, so he had to remake his life here in the United States from what he knew before. My mother was a teenager when the communists entered her hometown of Qingdao in 1949, and her parents made this bold decision to sneak her out of China by herself so she could have her freedom. She had just graduated from high school, and she was at the age where she could do anything she wanted with her life. And so they snuck her on a train by herself with no train ticket or no travel permission, and this train would take 8 days to get her to Hong Kong, and she couldn't bring any luggage because she would look conspicuous. And so she wore 8 pairs of underwear, one over the other, and she put her money in her underwear, and she made a pact with her family that they would not contact each other because they were afraid that someone would follow that communication trail and harm the family that she left behind. So they didn't have internet or Skype in 1949. So they said goodbye to each other, not knowing if they'd ever see each other again, and they never did. So she did escape, and ultimately she attended college in the United States. She escaped about 141 interrogations. She met my father in the United States, and she remade her life here. As Aaron said, I, on the other hand, was born in Oklahoma, and I grew up in Arkansas, 11,000 miles away from China, and equally as far away from the traditional Chinese way of life. I juggled living in 2 opposite cultures simultaneously, and my parents really wanted me to assimilate. I was an only child, and so I would fit in school. So they spoke Mandarin to each other at home, but they wanted me to speak English. They liked to eat bok choy and noodles. I like to eat pizza and corn dogs. My parents were not opposed to the arts, but they didn't really place a lot of emphasis on them either, other than making me take piano lessons. But when I was 9, my father died of cancer, and many 9-year-olds lack the vocabulary to articulate their grief over a loss of a parent, and this was doubly compounded for me, since Mandarin had been my parents' native language, but not mine. But when I played the piano, I found an avenue to express myself because music had the ability to soothe me, no matter what kind of music I would be playing. And although I often felt as though I had one foot in each of my cultures, which seemed so different from each other, music gave me this world that it was fully my own, and I felt like I belonged. The arts have the power to make each of us feel like we belong, whether we are pigeonholed by ourselves or others through identities that categorize us, such in race or gender or religion or income. The arts are one of the most powerful tools to celebrate and honor our differences rather than seeing them as a means of division. My own experience taught me that the arts give us ways to understand and be comfortable with multiple perspectives simultaneously, because the arts are not about either or, they're really about both and. And when it comes to the arts, there's a place at the same table for multiple points of view, and this makes us stronger. At the National Endowment for the Arts, my job now is to help us all understand that all Americans have the opportunity to be engaged in the arts, and to understand how the arts foster value and connections, creativity and innovation, because we want to create an environment where the arts participation is broadened and deepened and diversified, and we're paving new avenues for more people to become engaged with the arts, and we're creating new opportunities for individuals and communities to find their own stories. As part of this goal, we're committed to honoring the diversity that makes our nation so great. We are paying attention to the ways we tell our own stories at the NEA. All of our publications, both print and online, are committed to showcasing artists and arts organizations from geographically, ethnically, and sexually diverse backgrounds. We want to make sure that Americans, no matter who they are or where they live, can see their faces reflected in our work, and they know they have a place in the arts. The NEA is going to celebrate its 50th anniversary beginning September of this year, and we're asking the public to submit stories online as another way to give voice to the full tapestry of the American people. We're also paying attention to our own staffing practices. We currently employ 17% more women than the civilian labor force average. Our employment of African American women exceeds this average. We also exceed the labor force average for African American and Asian American males. And half of our members of our National Council on the Arts are women. 2/3 are categorized as a minority through race. We're also paying attention to the grants. In fiscal year 2013, the National Endowment for the Arts awarded more than 2,000 grants in nearly 16,000 communities, and that represents every congressional district in the nation. And more than half of these grants, 52%, benefited populations that have traditionally had fewer immediate opportunities to be engaged with the arts, those with disabilities, people living in low-income communities, those with limited English. And among the projects that we recently supported, for example, were the Birmingham Children's Theater production of The Watsons Go to Birmingham 1963. And this is an adaptation of Christopher Paul Curtis's novel commemorating the civil rights struggle. And the South Asian International Film Festival in San Francisco, which focuses on South Asia's diverse dance and musical traditions. And sculpture workshops for developmentally disabled adults at the Craft and Folk Art Museum in New Jersey. These are the types of projects that remind us of our heritage, and they preserve the cherished traditions of our culture, and they open our eyes to different ways of life. So these are just a few examples from the National Endowment for the Arts. As the demographics of the United States continue to shift, promoting diversity really needs to be a constant consideration for all of us. William Fry at the Brookings Institution, who is a demographer there, identifies some population trends in the 21st century. For example, there is a rapid growth of new minorities. At the same time, there is a diminished growth of the rapid aging of whites. And by 2020, that's 5.5 years from now, 40% of the United States population will be represented by those traditionally categorized as racial minorities. And that America is making such a shift quickly to a nation of no racial minorities. So as arts providers, this means that the makeup and perspectives of our audiences are shifting, and it's really important that we pay attention to how different groups participate in the arts. For example, our research found that first-generation Hispanic immigrants were the most likely to report attending the arts in order to celebrate their cultural heritage. And African Americans were the only population whose attendance at performing arts events held steady. You can find more information on engagement trends online for our survey for public participation in the arts in 2012, which we just released a few weeks ago. So as SphinxCon comes to a close today, we want to remember that the arts give everybody a way to tell their stories, and that includes those whose voices are not heard through traditional avenues. Because for those of us, and that's you and me, for those of us who work in the cultural sector, we have this opportunity to figure out new ways that make it easy for people to be connected with the arts so that their lives can be richer and their communities can be stronger. And we want to open our doors wider so that every resident or visitor knows that they're welcome and that the arts belong to them. The arts are not isolated in a corner as some separate category of society, and they're not for some elite. They are for all of us, and they infuse and they enrich and they can transform every aspect of our lives. Thank you so much for letting me speak with you today. Will you join us?
So we have a chance to, a nice chunk of time to ask Jane Chu questions you may have or follow up on some of the thoughts, but since I got to sit in one of the grown-up chairs now, I thought I'd take advantage of it and ask you one question first, if I may. So you were inviting us to recognize the ways in which the NEA is really taking a lead in embodying more diverse representation, in funding in more diverse ways. One of the consistent themes over our days here, and I've sort of put these words to it, is the need to disrupt entrenched preconceptions. We've heard lots of stories of ways in which different underrepresented groups feel frustrated by limited numbers, by way too slow pace of change, and our exploration here is how do we accelerate that? How do we disrupt the entrenched understandings of images on television, of public expectations of what's fair, or circumstantial limitations that come through finances? So in our theme for the conference is empowering change. My question for you is if you have any thoughts or advice from the range of so many different kinds of experience you've had, from artist through funder to current advocate-in-chief, is what advice do you have for us about ways we can be more effective in empowering, speeding up the pace of change?
Well, I think that we can all learn from each other, and we will learn from you as well in terms of specific ways that you can do that. But the first and foremost at the 30,000 feet level is don't ever forget that question. You know, don't let it go. Don't think about, relaxing into a mode of operation that may not provide as much access as we have the opportunity to do it. So really, at first and foremost, let's keep that question in our mind. What are some ways that we can make sure that there is access? What are some ways we can speed it up? So then it would leave it to all of our creativity to find ways. But the fastest way seems like through our actions is to find those ways that provide, that are really easy for people to get access to the arts. I'm thinking about, less about a specific one, but I'm actually thinking about, let's go back to this NEA research that we've just released. There was a section in the research where a lot of people asked, it was like 30 million Americans, so that's a lot of people. And so the question, because 30 million Americans had written in this research, they actually liked the arts. So it wasn't that they didn't like it, they really liked it, but they didn't go to an arts event or something like that. So we asked the question, why not? Why didn't you go? And there were some barriers, and none of them was about the arts. It was children under 6. We had children under 6 and there wasn't enough time. Another one was there wasn't enough access. It was a hard place to get to. This was mostly answered by people with some physical mobility challenges. It might be people who were retired that didn't have a way to get to the event. And then another response was they didn't have anybody to go with. So there was a social element to it. And so that was a wonderful finding, because then we just have an opportunity to think about how do we get them there? What makes it so super easy that they don't even come up with some kinds of barriers because they've already said they really like the arts. Similarly, your question about how do we find ways to accelerate exactly what we've been talking about over these few days. There are as many different ways related to the way you operate as a cultural provider, and get very creative. But at the heart of it, just don't forget, we must not too, while we're looking at the grant programs, while we're trying to figure out easier ways to cut through levels of grant processing and bureaucracy, which, by the way, we are going to do. Can we make this a lot easier, even just in the process itself? So I think the process is some of this, and by doing that, I think it will jump in terms of people's awareness of, wow, people really are participating and it is diverse.
So don't forget the question.
Okay.
Keep being pushy. I'm just reiterating your points. Keep being pushy and attend to processes and the low-hanging fruit of reducing practical impediments.
It seems like I have a tendency to want to favor low-hanging fruit. It's just a fun way to go over to the next door, whatever it is, because we're all lifelong learners in a creative process. And if you can go to the low-hanging fruit of one simple thing, that's going to open the door to the next. Just keep going, but don't forget the question.
Great. Let's see if our audience, let's bring up the lights. If you have a question, we have a question right here, and we got some lights.
Hey Jane, my name's Kevin. I go to school here at Wayne State in Detroit, studying theater management. And I know we've talked a lot about it, and nationally we're really interested in the work that local organizations can do, especially regionally, city-based, county-based government. And I'm curious because I know that's a great opportunity for some of these smaller organizations who, even in the 52% of organizations that have been funded by the NEA, who are from those underserved or less likely to be nationally recognized organizations, those local entities are still probably the best option for them. And I'm curious what the NEA is doing, or if they do anything to provide resources for how people in the cultural organizations can affect change at the local level. I know you can always write a letter to your congressperson, you can reach out to your local officials, but I was curious if there's kind of like a one sheet for what might be helpful action items to look for other sources.
To look for other sources of maybe resources and things too?
Yeah, or push for policy. I mean,
oh, I see.
Okay. From an advocacy perspective, looking inside of those well-run organizations that operate at a much more regional level as compared to everything being national.
So I'm going to ramble just a little bit and think about a couple of first of all, we're very mindful of that too. Thank you so much for bringing that. And we even have a rural initiative because we want to make sure that we are reaching, if we said all Americans have the opportunity to be engaged with the arts, we have to make sure that we are looking at all of America. But two things come to my mind in terms of things, one that we're doing now and one that we're about to launch. So one of them is that, let's just use arts education as an example. In arts education, we've been giving for years grants, and we'll continue to do so, grants to support students having the ability to have arts. We've been giving grants to support teacher development for arts, but now we're really focusing on a whole system. And that is connecting, for example, school districts with the ability to connect to community resources that help arts education. So the whole system is supported, and we'll give much larger grants, where a grant may be $10,000. In the past, it might be $150,000 to support a whole system that's connecting to community resources. So when you mention large or small, and small organizations, especially in the community, that are really creating vitality for the community, those community resources in something like that, in a system, can be more helped, and they can help us as well. The other thing that we're really thinking about now, and we'll go closer with the unfolding of the 50th, which is in September. We'll have a year-long, in the 50th anniversary, a whole year-long set of events and celebrations, and we've got a couple of initiatives. But we are thinking too, how do we, as a leader initiative, create some kind of increasing of the capacity of cultural providers, arts in general? How do we think about the next 50 years when we've had a way of looking at, again, just as an example, artists who, artists have all been characterized as being off in the corner, by themselves, and painters wearing a beret or something like that. But the studio of the future is that people are bouncing ideas off of each other in a room together. And there may be an artist, and there may be 5 other people who aren't in the arts, but the creativity is coming alive just by the interaction with each other. So how do we build that whole capacity so in the arts, where other facets as well as artists themselves know that they are connected to businesses who are looking for creativity and innovation, and that's actually been identified as one of the top 5 characteristics of hiring. How do we help them understand artists are there to, they can solve problems, they can think out of the box, they don't even know where the box is. I mean, I'm a trained artist because that's the beauty of it, you know, they can already help us solve problems in new ways, dispel, that's always been the way it's been done, and think of new creative. So by thinking that way, we're coming up actually with some ways to connect, so to be continued, of how we will hopefully create the whole, help facilitate the whole environment to answer that question, so that small organizations or ones that are really contributing to the community but might not have that national connection, they are solving problems, they're flexible, they're creating too. So we're looking, I'm a systems thinker, so we tend to look at the whole environment at the same time.
Two quick thoughts, just to let you know, thoughts that have come up here that relate to what you just said about the focus emerging in arts education. The term collective impact came up early here, this recognition, as you're recognizing at the NEA, that in fact by getting programs that are used to working in silos or heroically alone to identify significant public value that they can create together, and to begin to have the NEA supporting that kind of initiative can really change the way things are going.
That's a really big deal, and the reason is it not only brings the community together, there's so many different ways of having around an arts-based project or an arts-based program, and you look up and you've got entities that are connected to this arts-based program that you would traditionally see connected, like hospitals, utility companies, and churches connected to this as well. So I still think everybody wins. So collective impact, which is arts education term, but that way of thinking of everybody's connected, that's very cool, and we're giving a lot larger grants for that. But the other reason I love that and that we win that way is because we are also sending out the message that the arts are infusing our everyday lives. Arts for art's sake is just fabulous. That's how I got into the arts and the beauty of it. And they're tied to the transformation of communities. They're tied to creating varied and stable tax bases. They're tied to the healing arts. Our Walter Reed military medical program for military service members who've been affected by traumatic brain injury and other psychological health conditions. The Walter Reed has said they've seen such a transformation in these service members' lives because of our Healing Arts program that they're now creating it as a standard part of their standard care. It's non-invasive, it's not threatening. The service members are saying, oh, arts, okay, and then they find out that they're transformed, their families see the difference, they're addressing what they call an invisible wound. It's clearly a wound, but you don't see it on their physical body. So the more we send out these messages that we are tethered to the rest of the world and we're about it too, I think that helps us.
And just a little quick story about this emerging focus for the 50-year celebration. A few years ago, I did a tour of Australia introducing US-style teaching artistry. And at the end of it, there was a conference about it, and the answer that came back was, the way your artists work is even bigger than just teaching. We think you should change the name, and they should be called artist catalysts.
Cool.
Because they are catalytic in so many different fields and so many different ways.
Well, what we want your help in, because we'll learn from you as well, but we'll celebrate the first 50 years of the National Endowment for the Arts, and also that's also the anniversary of the National Endowment for the Humanities, sibling agencies. But we'll celebrate some of the key things that the NEA has contributed to help launch the arts, but we're really focused on the next 50. What do the arts look like? So we'll have everything from some convenings on the future of the arts to some projects that we will launch in different areas, especially for youth, because they are our artists of the future. So ways to celebrate, help us tell the stories, teach us, and also let's go together in the next 50.
Questions? Looking for hands. In the corner over there. A microphone is coming. Please stand. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tim Dang. I'm the artistic director of East West Players in Los Angeles. And earlier in the conference, I had an opportunity to present a 51% plan to prepare American theater for when America is going to be majority minority. Is there a way in which, in terms of the grant programs, that we can require organizations to have a diversity policy in which they can submit, or do something like the Arts Council of England, where they're demanding that their numbers change and risk the lack of funding?
We're in the middle of those conversations, so stay with us there. So the answer is there a way we can demand? I don't know that we're there yet, but we are so mindful of it that we're trying to figure out what that looks like. So, I would pick up the phone or something and call the National Endowment for the Arts, let's stay in this dialogue. We're thinking about having another convening about this actual topic as well, because you're going to help us figure out, is there a way to really promote it, because as we just noted, 3 states already in the United States where our majority are minorities, and as you know, by 2060 there will be if staying at the same trajectory, there will be no racial minorities. So stay in the conversation with us.
And I'll just mention Tim's challenge has really been taken up by Theater Communications
Great.
Group, and it's a really important discussion that they've undertaken as a result of his challenge.
Thank you for taking that step, Stan.
Other questions? Please, right up front.
You'd be really good on Price is Right.
Yeah, really.
Hi, I'm Jen Bradner with the Memphis Symphony Orchestra. So I have a question.
We're having a little trouble hearing you.
Jen Bradner, Memphis Symphony Orchestra. My question is, so we are talking about how we want to use artists and the arts for a catalyst to change and be in the conversations. But what's coming to mind is when there are G8 summits and global Clinton global initiatives, and everyone's brought together to have a conversation. Are you there? Will you be there?
Sometimes, and we're mindful of those too. So what we're doing to encourage that is something like we've talked about before. If we can create an environment where we've really shown that the arts are infusing our lives, and so back to can we create an infrastructure we're calling it Create America Forward. It's kind of like the studio of the future. If we can create an infrastructure where people really are recognizing how creative arts are in tangent with things like what businesses are looking for in terms of innovation, in terms of a strong infrastructure that will allow, and here's another aspect of it, sometimes arts are looking for just ways to pay their bills so they can create art. We know where all those resources are. We're not talking about a grant program, we're talking about a leadership initiative. Can't we have everybody understand where that is as well? So we're trying to make the field stronger through this infrastructure, and at the same time tie the field to so many other areas that really are looking for that creativity and the problem solving and that. And I really think by doing that and by showing that and having people go, oh gosh, that really, they're great, they're at the heart of that, that's what we do, create, then there may be more opportunities to be at those summits and things like that.
And
so we have some work to do. And one more thing, and I'm
Please,
sorry.
of course.
We have some work to do, but the other thing we have work to do, and it's really an opportunity, is to figure out how we communicate that in a way that people are hearing. So one of the things that I've experienced is, let's use this as an analogy of teaching. So if any of you who've been teachers in a classroom, you know that if you're teaching a specific subject, if you have a specific learning style, and you teach a specific subject, and everybody in the class has a different learning style, and you present it to them and they don't get it, you have 2 options. You could walk away and say, well, boy, they don't get it, they're dummies. But really effective teaching is about going to their learning style and trying to find a way to share that subject matter with how they hear. And that's another reason I advocate for ways to be tethered to other subject matters and other ways of thinking, because if you can get them to hear in their own learning style, they'll be intrigued enough to pay attention to some of the other things that we're talking about. So those kind of things feed how we communicate the arts is right now as key as what we're doing, and they feed into your question, because ultimately it's kind of like a pipeline that gets there. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
I remember once hearing a very challenging statement of this idea that if you're not at the table, you are the meal. and the notion that, in fact, what we can do to actually support you being at tables where the arts are usually not represented. So if ever you want to call on the field for that kind of support, I think you'll feel an upswell of recognition for the value of having you at those tables. Other questions? Yes, a hand just over here.
I think this is a question, Eric, so I hope you can help me. Maybe it's an observation, but Katie Smythe, New Ballet Ensemble, Memphis, Tennessee. We were very honored to be named in the National Youth Program Arts and Humanities Awards this year. But it's been a long struggle to receive NEA funding. And I think if we go back to some of the issues we talked about this week, it seems like a week we've talked about so many things. Sort of the hierarchy of arts institutions, being a grassroots institution and looking for your place in the funding arena. I think we've all struggled with that. The disciplines, when you apply to the NEA in a discipline, a small organization like New Ballet Ensemble may find themselves up against a Merce Cunningham. And the recognition then becomes a barrier. There's a wall because people don't know where you are. And when you hear back about the panelists' conversations, sometimes they can be stuck on one little thing that started a debate at the table, and then your mission they weren't even able to get to the mission. And then when you talk to the officers at the NEA, they do give very helpful advice, but sometimes it's don't apply in dance. You're an arts education institution. You should be applying in arts education. So grassroots organizations don't necessarily yet have their evaluation tools in place. That's expensive, and it's time-consuming when time is a resource. I think we've done better on that, but I know there are a lot of organizations that aren't yet ready to apply in arts education, but that's where they fit because it's too competitive in their discipline. Is there anything you can say to sort of address what seems to be a little bit of a gulf?
Well, I think it's really helpful to know about this, so thank you. Having just come out from the field as well, they're really big deals. What seems like a nuance on paper is a really big deal. And that's why I keep saying these words of, boy, you're going to teach us too, we're all in this together. And I really mean it, because you know that those nuances are really big deals. So beyond just where can I apply, we're paying attention to that too. So we're calling for, let's do an analysis of our grants, and we're finding right now that actually 62% of them are going to smaller organizations. But what does that really look like? Let's get into the nuances. So a couple of things are going through my mind. One is, I'll take that back with us, because we're going to really look through the process of applying for grants. What does it mean? So on one level, I've been looking at the grants, so I've read all the annual reports there are, and I've looked at all the grants, and trying to figure out, there's a couple of things that come to my mind. So first of all, when you look at, and I'm going to get to your question. You've noticed I never get directly to the question. So, because I always want to set a context, and I'm hoping this helps to set a context. So I've been looking at these grants, and it looks like 50 years ago there were specific easy to understand categories, and those are great, and actually they're still there. But as you got over the 50 years, you start seeing this expansion of various grant programs and people participating. And on the positive side, I really think that that's because the NEA wants to make sure they're making themselves relevant. If we're looking at this research that's saying the arts participation is not declining. It's expanding, but it's expanding in different ways. And we need to make sure that we are, as cultural providers, paying attention to how it's relevant. Are we paying attention to the topics we've been discussing for the last few days? Does it have meaning? And so all these categories are appearing that are new ways. For example, it used to be electronic media was just radio and television, and now NEA welcomes creation of videos and all kinds of things, because we found out 167 million adults participate in the arts first through electronic media. So, but we also are finding that it can be unwieldy if you don't just stop and pay attention to what it means. So the call is, get back to where you can just press the easy button and say, we'll figure this out. So that's one thing that we're just having that conversation about, and we'll delve much deeper into it in the next couple of months. So I'll take that back, but also, call the NEA and say, help us just want to register this as you go through the process. And then the other thing is that the first people who read the grants, as many of you know, are panels, citizen panels. So they make their first recommendations. How do we answer that question? How does we as citizens answer that question on what you've been talking about? How do you, you're helping me too.
Well, I don't know, but I do think some of my dearest friends who are here are from a large historic legacy institution, and we're here at the same table. And I do think, though, that we find ourselves in competition,
Okay.
And that sometimes it's not a fair fight. And so I think when a citizen panelist who has a long history in dance, sees a program and makes an assumption, and the staff member at the NEA, all of whom are great and answer our questions beautifully, but if they can't step in with some sort of, when we go to the Tennessee Arts Commission for a panel review, we are sitting there, and they will ask us direct questions that we answer. But an example, we teach hip hop and ballet. Well, we teach in a school that's 99% poverty, 100% African American, where boys are terribly teased for ballet. So we only teach hip hop in that environment. We bring the children to our safe place to teach ballet because it's a dangerous pursuit for a young man in that neighborhood. But when that made it to the table, we were seen as gender biased because boys studied hip hop and girls studied ballet. And at that point, and but we have this mechanism for bringing boys into ballet class, and they actually self-select, which the Wallace Foundation's survey, Something to Say, just pointed out that children want to self-select, and so we create that environment. But if we missed it in the language of the grant, then the opportunity was gone. I don't know how you address it.
Okay, but call it to attention, and
Okay.
That's a good thing
Thank
to
you.
be mindful of. Those nuances are a big deal.
And
Thank
those gateways, the keyholes of the orientation of the panel. What is the wording that actually takes into consideration to change the way they consider the paperwork introduction to the work? Beautiful to
Great.
introduce those kind of stuck places that we tend not to notice.
Great.
Other questions? We have a remaining 2.5 minutes or so.
And we have a new senior deputy chairman, Laura Callanan, who is addressing those same questions. So when we can make I don't know if you call it a list, a laundry list of the nuances that are more than nuances, those are important things to find out, and we've been talking about that, so thank you for that. I don't have the answer yet, but I'm being mindful of it is the first step. Remember, keep the question in your mind.
A question over here. Yes, thank you.
I'm Mark Clegg from the University of Michigan School of Music, and one of the things we're concerned about in professional art schools is training the next generation of artists. And you mentioned the arts for art's sake sort of argument, and of course all of us love the arts, or we wouldn't be here. But I think in many ways our training is sort of based on that based on giving people the talent, taking their talent to a level that would compete in the world, but that we don't talk about a lot of the issues in education that we're discussing here. And you, as sort of maybe the chief advocate for what we do in the United States, I just wonder if there are certain ideas or issues that you think either we as artists, or especially our next generation, needs to sort of have front and center, not just in what we do, but what makes what we do important.
Yeah.
And what kind of sort of attitudes would you like us to instill in the next generation of artists?
Sure. When I think back to my own training as a musician, when I went to college, especially, which was it wasn't a conservatory, but the training was like a conservatory. I was trained to go deep into my own self and find the purity of how I can express myself, and I would not let that go for anything now. I love it. It makes me much more authentic. I don't like to be tainted by something, especially if, we were discouraged from being tainted by even the audience, because that might be a commercial influence, So there's a value to doing that, and it's hard for me to say, don't do that, because there's something about your pure self when you can express yourself. So I will never let go of that, and if I don't get to do that kind of purity, I don't think I'm going to be living a meaningful life. That's how serious it is for me. But what I've done over the last, outside of college and now that I'm comfortable in my skin more than I was, when I was in college, I'm learning that I still get to do that, but I'm stronger enough now, emotionally or whatever, to do both and. I can reach out and touch other people and not necessarily get tainted by them. That sounds terrible, but you can be strong enough to see embrace other people's perspectives without losing yourself. And the arts allow us to do that. So one thing, to your question about how do we go forward, is we got to break a mindset that is an either-or mindset. People are wanting to put us in categories, whether it's race or something, that says it's this or it's that. If you win, it means you lose, and we've got to get this both and. And I think we're strong enough to do that we can figure out how we can go into the purity of ourselves and create and learn while we're in school or not or outside, and still be strong enough to embrace the world around us and help people understand that the arts infuse our lives. So as long as we don't have that either-or thing, I think we're moving in the right direction. It does seem to be helpful to learn about other subjects. Actually, that's the reason I got an MBA, is because I was so trained in my right brain, I felt like I needed to, it'd be fun, actually, to train in my left brain. Most people do the opposite, someday I'm going to be an artist, but I wanted to go learn, and I was in for a huge shock the first week or so because I didn't even understand the language because it's so linear, and I was not in a linear setup prior to that. But I turned out to be kind of valuable to see other people's points of view, and it still allowed me to be strong within myself. So those programs that allow you to see other areas of life and how the arts can help and creativity can make a difference in those areas of life while keeping yourself intact, and the purity of that and never losing that are the types of programs that are going to make us really super strong. It's also at the heart, to me, of what this conference is all about. How do we honor different perspectives and the different ways of seeing things and being and lifestyles? It does make us stronger if we can be comfortable in ambiguity and not always having everybody in categories alone and judging them in certain ways. That's the way we need to think in terms of how the programs move. And I'm seeing more programs in the arts go that direction, as long as it's not either or.
We're actually at the end of our time. So first, let me thank you for letting us, for a moment, consider getting an MBA as a frivolous activity, since it is usually looked at in the other way.
Yeah.
And ask you one just quick closing question. Is there anything we can do to help you accelerate the diversity and inclusion agenda? What can we do? And don't be afraid to tap us through Sphinx if there comes those occasions.
Absolutely. In the big picture, anything that we can do together that communicates that the arts infuse our everyday lives. So I'm really aware that we don't want to fall into that either or trap. So if I say something that it's going to touch another aspect of life that isn't the arts, I'm not saying to get rid of the arts, you see, but anything we can do there and to communicate, figure out a way to communicate this both and each of us is doing that in our own ways. So I don't even want to limit anybody on specific steps, because that's what creativity is about. We're not trying to hem everybody in, but do it in your own way. But that would be a really big deal if we could together change a paradigm that the arts are not off by themselves, but we're all infusing together. Because I really think if that paradigm even shifts to neutral, we are going to win. I mean, we are just going to, people are just going to celebrate the creativity that the whole arts industry has. So that's the big thing.
Jane, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. What?
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Great. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you again so much to Chairman Chu and to Eric Booth. Thank you both.
Yeah.
Thank you both. And that was SphinxCon. So I want to thank all of you for joining us, and there is one last kind of just quote. Yeah, I love quotes, so just wanted to leave you with, which was Pablo Picasso, who said that action is the foundational key to all success. And just that I encourage all of you as you leave here to not let this just have been 3 days of discourse and amazing conversation, but that each and every one of you translates what you have heard, the discussions, the conversations that you have participated in, translate that into action in your community, in your own art making, in your administrating, and in all of our communities around the country. So thank you all so much. Brave the snow, and we will see you over at Orchestra Hall for an amazing finals concert. Thank you all.